We are back at Big League Politics, and we are joined today by an adjunct professor at Penn State University. He comes to us from the world of academia. He is writing a new book that will be released soon called A Criminal History of the Democrat Party. Please welcome Christopher Smithmyer. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Patrick.
So tell us about your book. This is a pretty provocative title. It got my attention, certainly. A Criminal History of the Democrat Party.
Well, I started out, I ran for office back in 2012 down in Florida, and one of the things I noticed was anytime that a member of the Democrat Party was challenged for doing something wrong, the immediate reply was, oh, it's just that person. It's not the party. There's not an issue with the party leadership or anyone involved with the party. And after hearing it about 15 times, it started to sound like a canned response. So I started looking into it and started clear back with Andrew Jackson and looked at the evolution of cronyism and fraud and missing monies throughout the history of the Democrat Party.
So what is the history of the Democrat Party? It goes back to Andrew Jackson. Would you agree with that?
Yes, that's when it started, yes.
And
he broke away from the Democrat-Republican Party based on the principle that he, oddly enough, it's a really interesting time frame thing, because he didn't get the election the way he felt he should have, because he won the popular vote but did not win enough of the Electoral College to get elected to the presidency. That's whenever he became very engaged and decided that he wanted to change the world and make it so that it was fair to him and not fair to the rest of the country.
So that would have been the 1820 election between Quincy Adams and Jackson, where Quincy Adams won with the Electoral College, right?
Well, he was the only president that actually had to be picked by the House of Representatives.
Right, okay.
So he actually had that.
So what was the original platform of the Democratic Party, and how did it differ from the Democrat-Republicans?
Well, it started off with wanting to work with the constitutional fairness. It wanted to work a little bit more towards business. And really, it was to favor the people that had backed Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson originally didn't want to be president of the United States. He didn't even want to be a senator. A lot of his support came from people who supported him after the Battle of New Orleans, which was a battle that he won. And then whenever he invaded Florida, he had a lot of support from farmers and businessmen who moved into Florida after the United States claimed it from Spain.
Mm-hmm. And so as the 19th century went along, we get into the Industrial Revolution. I mean, what did the Democratic Party represent in American politics?
Well, the Democrat Party and the Democrat-Republican Party were very close together. The big split happened, like as you said, during the Industrial Revolution, whenever Abraham Lincoln kind of had the Union Party, which became the Republican Party, which is what we see today. And the big difference was the states' rights versus federal rights issue, because Andrew Jackson believed that he was going to change everything through telling the states what to do. One of the big things he had was the banking crisis, where the Congress of the United States elected to have a national bank, and he just said, well, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to pick the banks that I want to use. And the Democrat Party kind of stuck with that mentality of the government's going to tell people what to do, and the lower level people, whether it be slaves, minorities, poor working class whites, the Irish slaves in Pennsylvania,
right,
that they needed to be told what to do, they didn't need to be self-determinative.
Now, as we get into the 20th century, you start seeing the progressive movement rise up, and I think that was probably represented best by Woodrow Wilson, who won the three-way election in 1912, and then subsequently we had the Federal Reserve, we had the income tax, we got ourselves into World War I. Can you talk to us about those early progressives? What did they want, and what was the impact of Woodrow Wilson?
It's basically the same one world thing that you hear today, that we gotta subjugate the United States to the United Nations, which didn't exist at the time. But Woodrow Wilson was a big believer in a global community where nations should cede their authority to the global community, and that's what the League of Nations started out as, which eventually was morphed into the United Nations. And to facilitate this, we had the income tax, which was started well before Wilson, but Wyoming finally capitulated and accepted the income tax in 1913. And then you have Federal Reserve Bank being created, which was taking our money away from the gold standard and putting it into this fiat currency that really there's no control system over, and it's owned by a private bank.
Yep. And what is the effect of that to this day?
Well, we're seeing that the dollar has gone down thousands of percent in value. The cost of goods has risen so much that people aren't really able to deal with the concept of how inexpensive goods used to be without the current really oppressive tax regime. And if you look at the way that the income tax was brought in, it was brought in where it only affected about 1% of Americans when the initial income tax went out. And now we're hitting pretty much every American in the United States that isn't on some sort of entitlement is being affected by the income tax. And it's just the way of the government moving more and more into individuals' lives. And the whole theme of control and people not being able to control their own lives.
Now, as we get into the middle of the 20th century, you see, traditionally Democrats were the segregationists, right? And then you saw the Republicans, always during Eisenhower and whatnot, and Martin Luther King even is said to have been a Republican, preaching for diversity. Obama says that around the 50s, the 60s, that's when things started to switch and the Republicans became the supposed racist party. What happened, and how did the Democrats reconcile their segregationist roots?
Well, you've also got to remember that President Obama said that he didn't have any embarrassing scandals during his time in the White House, which, if you get the book, you'll see that he had more scandals than pretty much any president in history. But the way that they reconcile this is it's still about segregation. And I think if you look at the Kanye West, Dennis Rodman situation from a few months ago, where if someone that is supposed to be a hardcore Democrat, which would be an actor that is a minority, and with Dennis Rodman's past, coming out and supporting an action of a Republican president, you saw the reaction. It's still about segregation. It's still about telling people you need to be in your place. And you need to express our views. You need to do what we tell you to do, not what you think you should do. Mm-hmm. Whereas the Republican Party has always, we've kind of been a little bit ragtag. The Republican Party has always accepted anyone. And it's been the Democrat Party that says, oh, the Republicans don't like gays, or oh, the Republicans don't like blacks, or the Republicans don't like immigrants. Whenever it was the Republicans that weren't telling people, and the Republicans were supporting the immigrants while Tammany Hall was throwing stones at them on the pier. The Republicans were supporting civil rights whenever the KKK was burning crosses in the South. And the Republican Party of today, it's of people who came to this country legally to get their turn to become citizens, as opposed to looking at people that are coming in illegally. And of course, if you look at what the DMV out in California is doing, you can see why the Democrats are probably supporting that part of it too.
So in your view, what are some of the biggest crimes that the Democratic Party is responsible for?
The Democrat Party, some of the biggest crimes is creating the media industrial complex. We were always warned about the military industrial complex destroying our freedoms, but nobody ever talked about the media industrial complex, where if you say something loud enough and long enough, people will start to believe it. And as you saw a couple weeks ago with the confirmation hearings, that kind of came to be what happened when you had very little evidence on a lot of claims, and people are down in Washington, D.C. protesting it without evidence. And I'm a big supporter of believing women who have been abused. I have friends that have been abused. And when there's no evidence and you're supposed to believe somebody anyway, that becomes scary, because you start to lose your due process in the system, and you start to lose a little bit of who we are as a country.
Who are the most powerful people in the Democratic Party now, and what's their real agenda?
The most powerful people in any political party right now would be the people that are donating money. And while we do have the talking heads like Nancy Pelosi or Debbie Schultz or Maxine Waters, their agenda is dictated by the people that are sponsoring them, and it's always been the same, where it is take jobs away from the United States and move it to places where these companies don't have to pay any money for the workers, as you've seen with some of the information that's come out about different major corporations involved with the NFL kneeling scandal. And they want to keep it so that people aren't looking at what's going on in the world, but they're just looking at what's going on in their lives. Mm-hmm. And whenever you start looking away from what's going on globally, you don't realize that your little piece of the pie is getting smaller and smaller each time that they take a dime away in taxes.
Yep. Professor, you're a lot smarter than me, so forgive me, but I've always had this theory that the thing that really drives the Democratic Party is sort of this idea of empowerment, this sort of Oprah Winfrey thing, this moral relativism where whatever you're doing, whatever mistakes you're making in your life, that's okay. And not only is that okay, but you're a victim because you engage in these kinds of things, whether it be choosing not to work or whatever. And I mean, is that really what drives it? Because it seems to me like it's a lot easier to say to people, just keep doing what you're doing, you're great, you're a victim, it's somebody else's fault, than the Republican line, which usually is, no, you have responsibility, you need to show up to work and get the job done.
I think it is a kind of false empowerment. Whenever I was going to law school, one of our professors told us that in our con law class, whenever the incorporation doctrine was put into effect and the constitutional rights became state rights and we started looking at discrimination for sex and race, that the basic opinion of the Supreme Court is you're as equal as we tell you you are. So whether you're a specifically protected class, a semi-protected class, or a non-protected class. That's kind of how the approach of the media industrial complex is today, where you are as protected as we say you are. If you are a celebrity, then you get special treatment whenever you have drunk driving issues, as opposed to if you're a regular person like me or you, that if we were caught drunk driving, we'd either spend time in jail or lose our license or whatnot. It's really a false form of empowerment where they say you're a victim, but at the moment that someone else gives you that victim status, you're giving up your ability to self-define who you are.
Mm-hmm. Now, in talking about Democrat history, I mean, I tend to think that Kennedy was a pretty good president, and Lyndon Johnson, I would say probably in the modern era, is the one that, you know, started this, maybe not started, but certainly pushed along with his Great Society, you know, what the Democratic Party has become. Who are some of the people that really shaped the Democrats into what they are now?
Well, I'd agree with you that Kennedy was a big shaper. He was kind of like the plug that kept the tide from rolling out, which is what LBJ was. And LBJ had some pretty famous quotes about a certain group of minorities that kind of tell you where the party like lines up with things. But I really think the main architect would be FDR. Mm-hmm. If you look at the Blue Eagle program, you look at the Tennessee Valley Authority program, and you start comparing it to other things that were going in other countries at that period of time, such as Italy and Germany, you see that the massive industrial projects in Tennessee were very similar to the projects of the Autobahn in Germany. And the Blue Eagle program, where people's windows were getting smashed out because they didn't have their little Blue Eagle logo, were very similar to like the Night of Long Knives and stuff like that, of people getting their windows smashed out because of who they were. And that kind of mentality has permeated up through the times to where you saw, I believe it was this weekend somewhere in Texas, that guy had a Trump sticker on his car. So first they vandalized it, then they smashed the windows out, and then somebody set it on fire. Yep. And you're seeing that people are being isolated for who they support. Even that young girl out at Stanford that had, or not Stanford, Berkeley, that had the hat on that said "Make Bitcoin Great Again," and while she was getting interviewed, got sprayed with pepper spray. You're still seeing if you don't fit into the box that you're put into, they're going to come get you. And that's what they're doing to people in the restaurants when they're going after our elected officials. Yeah. Yeah. You know, Roosevelt actually was a free trader, and then he would go back to the unions and say, basically, look, you guys can't compete anymore. That's why you need to vote for me. I've got your back. I think he sort of played it both ways. I think I see that a lot with Democrats, where they make the economy. Yeah, they make the economy worse so that you have no choice but to vote for them because they give you the welfare. Where does this come from? I mean, people like Nancy Pelosi aren't too bright, but somebody's telling them what to do. I mean, who is holding the kind of the book of the Democrat ideology that keeps it going? I mean, the old book of Democrat ideology would be Rules for Radicals. I know they always scoff when you mention it, but when you look in the modern era, it's where the money, you start following the money. I do believe that President Trump is actually starting to follow the money. If you listen to a couple of his tweets, you've got to be careful which name to say because they tend to be kind of litigationist. But whenever it's a lot of money is coming from a certain place, especially if it's from out of country, say somewhere like Hungary or something like that, you start to see a lot of problems.
Yep. And your view, and I suppose it's my view too, is that what the Democrats really want is a one world government in which America is not all that powerful.
I can see that that's the way that they want to go. I heard a couple months ago there was people talking about Barack Obama becoming Secretary General of the UN, and that's where it gets really scary whenever you have failed policies in one country and then you can go to another even bigger stage and try to invoke those failed policies. But yeah, you see a lot of it with the open borders, even with the European model. That nobody wants as open borders as some of the sanctuary cities that we're seeing in the United States. It's getting really scary that they want to take away the definition of what makes it a country, and that becomes dangerous.
Now, why are Republicans so hesitant to fight? Until Trump, there never would have been any fight going on in the Republican Party, it seems like. Are the Republicans constituted in such a way where they're not really a good challenge for the Democrats?
Well, one problem is there's always bureaucracy. We have such a wide variety of people that we welcome into the party that we have our libertarian wing, we have our conservative wing, and there's all different wings of the moral conservative wing. And whenever they come together, there's a lot of bureaucracy. And the state parties, there's people that can be a little bit edgy, that can be people that are going to go out and fight for what people believe in and what's going on in this country. Joe Kaufman down in Broward County, Florida, is an excellent example of a person that the National Republican Party should be throwing a lot of money behind, because he has the potential to unseat Debbie Schultz, but he's such a strong, independent person that a lot of people at the upper levels get afraid of it. And that was what happened with Trump whenever they kept telling us that he wasn't a real candidate. And I've seen them do a minor method of that with Joe. And whenever you see things like that, that keeps the people that are willing to stick their necks out from getting into office. You have people that make fun of Rand Paul. And I don't agree with him on everything, but he puts his neck out there. If he believes in something, he'll stand up for it. He doesn't get wishy-washy. And it's one of those lukewarm things. And at the Republican Party, sometimes we have a little bit of a danger of being tepid and not going out to fight and not sticking our necks out. And the other side, as Secretary Clinton said this week, that they don't have to be civil with us. But I believe that the Republican Party is still the adult room where we still act mature. And even whenever there are some little bit of outbursts, we still hold that level of respect for the other side that is so important.
Why are the Democrats so effective at these social issues on college campuses?
I have a friend who used to be one of the presidents of the Young Democrats, and I'm not sure whether she was a national president or a chapter president. And she eventually became a Republican, and she repeated to me one time a quote. I'd heard it before, but I'd never heard it from an actual Democrat saying it, that says, when you're a young conservative, you're heartless. When you're an old Democrat, you're brainless. And what it is these college campuses, and I went to school for 14 years to get all my degrees, they keep telling you, oh, the government will keep giving to you, the government will keep giving to you, the government will keep giving to you, until you get out of college, and then they say, well, now it's time to pay the government back for all that they've given you. A lot of people coming out of college, they're living for the first time out from under their parents' roofs. And whenever they're not being told, hey, this is why I'm giving you this money, this is your allowance, do your chores, you get the money. Whenever you go to college, it's you show up for class, you get the money. And a lot of people don't start to see where that money comes from until someone points it out to them. And I've seen on several college campuses that I've taught on, whenever you ask students how they plan on paying their student loans back, they say, well, I'm going to get a $150,000 a year job right out of college. And you look at what courses you're teaching them and you ask them, have you looked at what the average salary is for that? And a lot of people in my field don't even know what the average salaries are. And they're telling kids these ridiculous numbers, and it becomes dangerous. And one of the nice things that I've seen, especially like under Rick Scott down in Florida, is where they're making community colleges tuition less expensive. So instead of taking loans out, students are actually paying their way through college, which gives them this feeling of actually achievement. And they pay the money and they realize that that money is coming out of their pocket. And you'll find that those campuses tend to be a whole lot more conservative. Liberty University, the College of the Ozarks, are the same way. The only real outlier would be Oberlin, where they have a lot of kids working, and they're still very liberal.
Mm-hmm. Now, working in academia, how much of a target is there on your head for being a conservative?
You get jabbed about it a little bit. There are radical professors out there, but most professors are, like they say that college professors are all liberal. A lot of them are left center. And a lot of them don't like the way that the Democrat Party is becoming either, but they don't like what the Republican Party is presenting. But every once in a while, you'll butt heads with somebody that's hardcore and either lying to students or discriminating against conservative students, and you have to butt heads with them, and you have to stand up for the kids. And I've found that the academic affairs office at the campus that I taught at and the diversity office, they're very good at protecting both sides of the aisle. Mm-hmm. And while they do have a liberal stance to them, they still, if a conservative student goes and says that they've been called out or that somebody's giving them bad grades because they're conservative, usually that's where they turn to in the college to actually get some support and get some protection.
Well,
the young Republican.
There is an assault case against the University of North Carolina professor Dwayne Dixon, who's a leader of Antifa and a left-wing militant group called Redneck Revolt. He tore down the Silent Sam statue at UNC. The trial is next month, so I hope that you will stay tuned on that, because I think that's pretty big news in the world of higher education. I want to ask you, what's at stake in this midterms? How do we break the psychic hold that the Democrats have on their voters? And if the Democrats actually do take the House, they're probably not going to take the Senate. If they do take the House, what happens?
If they take the House, Nancy Pelosi becomes Speaker of the House, likely. I've heard other names going around, like Maxine Waters and stuff. And Nancy Pelosi is a bureaucrat. So the odds of this impeachment thing coming up are pretty slim if she takes the House. But if one of the more radical Democrats takes the Speaker of the House, you're going to see an impeachment proceeding against the president, even if they don't have anything, and then it's going to go and waste millions of dollars of American money in the Senate. But the biggest danger is we're seeing record growth in declining the unemployment rate, work rates among minorities, the stock market. We're seeing record growth, and that record growth is going to stop because we're going to have one house of our political system that is not going to want to do what the president's doing and that we've seen to work. Mm-hmm. And it's very scary whenever we see that. And one of the ways that we can promote that is by informing people that the issues in the Democrat Party aren't individual, they're endemic. And the thing about college students is, while they may tend to be more favorable towards socialism while they're in school until they get out and get to work, generally they're smart kids. And when they have somebody come in, like, I'm trying to think of somebody other than Milo, but
Candace
somebody
Owens,
from the
maybe?
conservative side, like Nikki Haley or somebody, they come in and they get this message and they go and research it, because that's what they're trained to do in college, is just sit there and research and learn stuff. And whenever they start researching it, you'll find that a lot of them start joining like the walk away movement, where they might not become Republicans, but they quit becoming Democrats and become independents. And I think that's why you're seeing such a swell in the independents in the United States right now, is because so many people are walking away and they're educating themselves.
Yep. So tell us about the book, A Criminal History of the Democrat Party. I love the title. When is it coming out? When can we buy it? And how long is it? And, you know, tell us all about it.
It's about 400 pages long, and it should be coming out this weekend. You know how the online booksellers are. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer to get out than others. But the book starts with Andrew Jackson and works up through most of the Democrat presidents that had scandals in their administrations. And we take each time frame, and it's not just necessarily targeting the Democrat presidents, it's just taking what went into place whenever they were in office. And we look at how things happened, what happened, and try to get through the hype of one thing that kind of exonerates Andrew Jackson is a lot of people blame him for the Trail of Tears whenever he was actually the only person that was really fighting against it. Mm-hmm. He was trying to pay the Indians for their land, and he just kind of got it cut out from under him. But our schools don't teach that. Mm-hmm. They teach that FDR was a hero, that Andrew Jackson was a horrible person. Now they're teaching that Abraham Lincoln didn't free the slaves, which is one of the biggest myths of all time, because regardless of whether the southern states recognized the authority of the federal government, he freed the slaves in the South, which was where all the slaves were. Yep. And regardless of whether the people that were fighting the war believed that or not, the policy of the United States was that they were free.
Yeah.
And that's really one of the big reasons that we won the war, is because they started coming, the former slaves started coming and fighting the war to help free their families.
Well, this is interesting stuff. A criminal history of the Democrat Party. Professor Christopher Smithmyer, thank you for joining us. We appreciate your insight.
Okay, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, sir.